The county snowplow stopped at my gate just before sunrise, but the driver never got out. He already saw the chain. Behind him sat 3 HOA SUVs, a contractor trailer, and Victoria Hale holding a stack of legal papers like she thought she already owned my land. Funny thing is, my father built that mountain road 40 years before her HOA ever existed. Back when this ridge was nothing but timber, rock, and snow deep enough to bury a truck overnight. Every luxury cabin above my property exists because my father cut that road through solid granite with his own equipment. Now the HOA wanted to call it community property, and they picked the biggest snowstorm in 10 years to try taking it. So while Victoria kept talking about county filings and emergency access, I walked past her, chained the gate shut, and parked both of my snowplows across the entrance. That's when everybody stopped talking, because they suddenly realized something. Without my road, nobody on this mountain was getting home before the storm hit. I used to design highway systems for a corporate engineering firm in Denver. Long hours, endless meetings, the kind of job where people wore expensive watches and lied to each other with straight faces. After my father died, I walked away from all of it and came back to Black Pine Ridge. Most people wouldn't last one winter up here. The snow comes fast, the roads disappear overnight, and if a bridge washes out, you fix it yourself or stay trapped for weeks. That mountain road crossing my property isn't just gravel and asphalt to me. I spend half the year clearing snow, repairing landslides, replacing guardrails, and pulling stranded residents out of ditches when storms hit. Funny thing is, most of those same residents live in million-dollar HOA cabins built decades after my family settled this ridge. And despite everything I've done for this mountain, the HOA still treats me like some problem they haven't solved yet. For years, they sent fines, easement offers, and threats disguised as community proposals. But lately, Victoria Hale stopped asking. She started acting like that road already belonged to her. I used to design highway systems for a corporate engineering firm in Denver. Long hours, endless meetings, the kind of job where people wore expensive watches and lied to each other with straight faces. After my father died, I walked away from all of it and came back to Black Pine Ridge. Most people wouldn't last one winter up here. The snow comes fast, the roads disappear overnight, and if a bridge washes out, you fix it yourself or stay trapped for weeks. That mountain road crossing my property isn't just gravel and asphalt to me. I spend half the year clearing snow, repairing landslides, replacing guardrails, and pulling stranded residents out of ditches when storms hit. Funny thing is, most of those same residents live in million-dollar HOA cabins built decades after my family settled this ridge. And despite everything I've done for this mountain, the HOA still treats me like some problem they haven't solved yet. For years, they sent fines, easement offers, and threats disguised as community proposals. But lately, Victoria Hale stopped asking. She started acting like that road already belonged to her. Victoria Hale didn't come alone. By 7 that morning, the bottom of my road looked less like a neighborhood dispute and more like a small government operation. 2 HOA attorneys stood beside the county truck, flipping through binders, while private contractors unloaded equipment from a flatbed trailer. Behind them, 3 men in bright survey jackets planted orange markers in the snow like they'd already been hired to redraw my property lines. Then came the board members. Most of them stayed near their SUVs with coffee cups in their hands, pretending they weren't involved. Funny how people get brave when they think lawyers are standing between them and consequences. Victoria walked toward me like she owned the mountain already. "You've been informed repeatedly about the updated access designation," she said, holding out the paperwork again. "This road was converted into community infrastructure years ago." I finally took the documents from her hand. The first thing I noticed was the survey map. Wrong coordinates, not slightly wrong either. Whoever prepared it used markers from the Eastern Ridge instead of Boone Pass Road. Then I noticed the county filing stamp. The date had clearly been altered. Even worse, one of the signatures looked almost copied instead of signed. That's when my stomach tightened. Because sloppy paperwork doesn't scare me. Confident people with sloppy paperwork do. "You expecting me not to read this?" I asked. Victoria smiled like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. The county already approved the revisions. Behind her, one of the contractors moved closer to my gate, carrying bolt cutters. I stepped directly in front of him. "Don't touch that gate." The guy stopped immediately. Smart man. By then, residents from the upper ridge had started gathering near the road entrance. People always come outside when there's drama on the mountain, especially rich retirees with nothing better to do before breakfast. Victoria saw the audience growing and immediately changed her tone. "Silas," she said loudly, "this isn't personal, but you cannot block emergency access to an entire community before a major storm." There it was. Not law, not ownership. Fear. A few residents started murmuring behind her while snow blew across the road sideways. "She's right," somebody muttered. Victoria kept going. If an ambulance needs access tonight and this gate delays responders, people could die. That line was for the crowd, not for me. I looked back down at the paperwork in my hands and kept spotting problems the more I read. Missing parcel references, incorrect easement language. Half the legal descriptions didn't even match my property boundaries. Either somebody rushed this filing, or somebody expected intimidation to work faster than facts. You forged county dates, I said calmly. One of the attorneys immediately stepped forward. Be careful making accusations, Mr. Boone. I ignored him. Then I looked directly at Victoria. You waited until the biggest storm of the year to do this. Why? For the first time, her smile faded just slightly. That told me everything. This wasn't some random HOA power trip anymore. There was urgency behind it, pressure, deadlines, and suddenly I realized something else too. The contractors standing behind her weren't prepared for this mountain at all. Their trucks didn't even have proper snow chains installed yet. One of the surveyors was already freezing because he showed up wearing hiking boots instead of insulated gear. City people. Victoria thought legal paperwork gave her control up here, but mountains don't care about paperwork. The wind picked up harder, rattling the steel gate beside me. Then I handed the documents back to her. If this road belongs to the HOA now, I said quietly, then maintenance belongs to the HOA too. Victoria frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Instead of answering, I turned around, grabbed the gate, and pulled it fully shut. Then I slid the steel chain through the bars and locked it tight. The sound of that padlock clicking into place echoed louder than the wind. One of the contractors looked at the sky nervously. Another checked the snow piling near his tires. That's when they finally understood something the HOA board didn't. Without me clearing this road, that mountain was about to become a prison buried under 6 feet of snow. By the time I got back to Black Pine Ridge, the storm had started swallowing the mountain. Snow hammered the windshield the entire drive home, while wind pushed powder across the highway like ocean waves. Half the residents up there still thought this was just another HOA dispute. It wasn't. Victoria Hale had timed this perfectly. First major storm of the season. Road conditions getting worse by the hour. Panic spreading fast enough to make people stop asking questions. The second I reached my property, I saw the first notice nailed to my gate. Emergency HOA violation, access obstruction, bright red lettering, official-looking stamp, legal threats underneath. I tore it down before finishing the first sentence. Then I spotted 3 more. One attached to my mailbox, one taped to my equipment shed, and one shoved directly under my cabin door. Victoria was escalating fast. By that evening, residents started getting HOA emails, blaming me for potential emergency access delays during severe weather conditions. Caleb forwarded me screenshots from one of the neighborhood groups online. People were already turning on me. Selfish old man. Someone should sue him. What happens if an ambulance can't get through? Funny thing is, most of those same people had watched me pull their vehicles out of snowbanks for years without charging them $1. That's the part people never tell you about mountain communities. Folks love self-reliant men right up until those men stop being convenient. Around sunset, Caleb came into the cabin carrying another envelope. You're gonna love this one. I opened it. Towing notice. Apparently the HOA now intended to remove my snowplows for blocking community access infrastructure. I actually laughed reading that. You laughing because this is insane, Caleb asked, or because you're about to do something stupid? Both. Outside, the storm kept getting worse. The wind had shifted north by then, which meant the upper ridge would drift shut before morning. Once that happened, supply trucks wouldn't make it through for days. Right on schedule, my phone started ringing. Residents wanting help. One family couldn't get propane delivered. Another guy slid his SUV into a ditch near Aspen Turn. Somebody else needed generator fuel before their pipes froze. And despite everything the HOA was saying about me online, they still called me first. Because deep down, everybody on this mountain knew the truth. The HOA held meetings. I kept people alive during winters. Around 9 that night, I walked out to check the road conditions near the North Bridge. Snow already covered my boot tracks within minutes. Visibility couldn't have been more than 30 yards. That's when I noticed fresh tire marks near the ridge overlook. Not resident tracks, heavy trucks. I followed them uphill until they disappeared near an old service clearing overlooking the western slope. And that's where I found it. Survey stakes, dozens of them. Bright orange markers buried in the snow stretching across the ridgeline above my road. At first, I thought it was another HOA survey job. Then I noticed the laminated site map attached to one of the posts. Black Pine Resort Expansion, Preliminary Access Plan. I stood there staring at it while snow blew sideways across the clearing. Resort expansion. Suddenly everything made sense. The pressure, the fake filings, the timing before the storm, the obsession with my road. This was never about community access. Victoria Hale wasn't trying to protect homeowners. She was trying to hand investors the only reliable access route through the mountain. And according to the development sketches pinned beneath the snow, my road was the centerpiece of the entire project. Luxury lodges, private ski lifts, tourist access routes, parking expansions, millions of dollars sitting on top of Boone Pass Road. That's why she looked nervous when I questioned the filings. Because somebody promised investors they'd secure this road before winter construction planning started. I ripped the map off the survey post and folded it under my coat. Then I looked down toward the lights of Black Pine Ridge, glowing faintly through the storm below. For years, I thought Victoria Hale was just another power-hungry HOA president drunk on authority. I was wrong. This whole mountain had already been sold behind everyone's backs, and my property was the final piece standing in the way. Victoria Hale came after me hard the next morning. Not publicly at first, professionally, which honestly made it worse. By sunrise, private plow operators were already trying to cut temporary bypass trails through the western tree line beside my road. I watched them from my porch with binoculars while they pushed snow straight into a drainage ditch my father built decades ago to stop spring washouts. Idiots almost buried their own equipment within 20 minutes. Mountains punish arrogance fast. Around the same time, Caleb walked into the kitchen carrying his phone. "You made the HOA newsletter that bad?" He tossed the phone onto the table. Victoria had sent a community-wide email overnight accusing me of obstructing emergency winter access during a declared severe weather event. Underneath that came the real poison. Potential insurance cancellation risks, property value concerns, delayed emergency response times. She knew exactly what buttons to push with these people. Most of the residents up here were retirees who invested their savings into mountain homes they only used a few months a year. Fear hits different when people think their property values are about to collapse. By noon, I started getting visitors, not neighbors, complainers. First came Martin Keller from the Upper Ridge, retired dentist, always acted like shoveling his own driveway qualified as surviving wilderness life. "You need to stop this nonsense," he snapped the second I opened the door. "My wife has a heart condition." I stared at him for a second. "Martin, I pulled your Mercedes out of a snowbank 3 winters in a row." "That's not the point." "No," I said quietly. "The point is your HOA spent years treating me like a problem until they suddenly needed my road." He didn't have much to say after that. Others came too. Some angry, some nervous, most repeating the exact same HOA talking points word for word like Victoria handed everybody scripts before sending them outside. Then came the court filing. Emergency injunction request. The HOA was now officially petitioning the county to force immediate access through my property due to community safety concerns. Funny thing is, buried inside the paperwork was a line stating the HOA had already secured future infrastructure partnerships dependent on uninterrupted access routes. Future infrastructure partnerships. That's corporate language. Resort language. Victoria wasn't even hiding it anymore. By late afternoon, the storm turned ugly. Whiteout conditions rolled across the ridge so thick I could barely see the lower bridge from my porch. Power flickered twice inside the cabin before finally stabilizing. Somewhere uphill, a transformer popped loud enough to echo through the valley. Then Caleb noticed the SUV, dark gray, parked near the lower ridge entrance. "Been sitting there almost 2 hours. HOA security?" he asked. "Looks like it. The vehicle never came onto my property. Just sat there watching the gate through the snowfall." Intimidation. Simple as that. Victoria wanted pressure from every direction at once. Legal threats, public outrage, surveillance, fear. Problem was, I grew up on this mountain. People like Victoria always assume pressure works on everybody because it works on them. That night, I started preparing properly, not emotionally, systematically. I installed trail cameras near the gate and fuel shed, mounted floodlights facing the lower ridge, backed up every property record onto hard drives, organized 30 years of maintenance receipts into labeled binders, snow removal logs, bridge repair invoices, avalanche cleanup expenses. Every dollar my family ever spent maintaining Boone Pass Road. If Victoria wanted war, I wasn't fighting with emotions. I was fighting with evidence. Around midnight, Caleb came back inside after checking the generator shed. "You're not gonna like this." I grabbed my coat and followed him outside. The fuel line on my smaller snowplow had been sliced clean open, not damaged. Cut. Diesel leaked slowly into the snow beneath the engine, while wind carried the smell through the dark. Then I saw the tires. 2 of them slashed. Caleb looked furious. "I'll tell you exactly who did this. Doesn't matter unless we can prove it." That's when my flashlight beam landed on the trees beside the road. Bright orange papers nailed directly into the bark. "Open the road before someone dies." 3 separate notices. No signatures, no names, just threats hanging in the snow like warnings. The next 3 days felt less like winter and more like a siege. Snow buried the mountain so fast that even the pine trees started disappearing beneath white drifts. The county stopped sending plows altogether after the second highway closure, which meant Boone Pass Road became the only thing keeping Black Pine Ridge connected to the outside world. And somehow, according to Victoria Hale, I was the villain. Every few hours, another HOA email hit the residents. Urgent community notice. Legal update. Winter access emergency. She blamed me for everything. Missed propane deliveries. Falling property values. Potential insurance investigations. One message even claimed emergency responders were considering Black Pine Ridge a high-risk access zone because of private obstruction concerns. That one made me laugh, because 2 winters earlier, I personally drove a paramedic through a blizzard after county vehicles got stuck halfway up the ridge. Funny how quickly people rewrite history when money gets involved. By the 4th day, power lines started failing across the mountain. First, the western cabins went dark. Then half the upper ridge lost electricity after heavy ice snapped a utility pole near Cedar Turn. Temperatures dropped below zero that night, and panic spread fast after that. Residents started calling me nonstop. Not the HOA, me. Generators failing. Frozen pipes. Cars buried under drifting snow. One older couple got stranded near the North Bridge after trying to drive into town for medication. Caleb and I spent nearly 2 hours digging them out while snow hammered us sideways hard enough to sting our faces raw. The husband grabbed my arm before leaving. Victoria says you're the reason this mountain's falling apart. I looked at the man's shaking hands, then at the road I'd just cleared for him. Does it look like I'm the problem? He didn't answer, because deep down, people knew. The HOA held meetings in heated lodges while Caleb and I spent nights outside keeping roads open so residents didn't freeze. That truth was getting harder to hide. Later that evening, I finally got the call I'd been expecting. Deputy Warren Cole, need to talk, he said quietly, in person. He showed up just after dark in an unmarked county SUV with snow packed halfway up the doors. The second he stepped inside my cabin, he removed his gloves and walked straight to the fireplace without saying a word. That's how tired he looked. You arresting me? I asked. Not tonight. He stared into the fire for a long moment before finally speaking again. They thought you'd fold before the storm hit. I leaned back slowly. Who's they? Warren gave me a look that answered the question without words. Victoria, the board, the investors, all of them. They figured enough legal pressure and public heat would make you sign temporary access agreements. He shook his head. Then the storm got worse than forecast. Outside, the wind slammed against the cabin walls hard enough to rattle the windows. Warren lowered his voice. County's getting flooded with complaints now. Residents are scared. Supplies are low. And Victoria's pushing hard for emergency seizure authority over your road. I almost laughed hearing that. Emergency seizure? She's calling it a public safety necessity. Of course she is. Warren looked exhausted. Off the record? He said quietly. This whole thing feels wrong. I studied him carefully but stayed silent. Then he reached into his coat pocket and slid a folded paper across my table. A county weather advisory, projected snowfall totals, avalanche warnings, infrastructure risk zones. The upper ridge was highlighted in red. They're not prepared for another 48 hours of this, he admitted. Half those contractors Victoria hired already left the mountain. That didn't surprise me at all. People from the city always think money makes them tougher than weather. Mountains teach different lessons. Warren stood near the door before leaving. One more thing, he said. What's that? Be careful tonight. Something about the way he said it tightened my stomach immediately. 2 hours later, I understood why. Around midnight, one of my trail cameras picked up movement near the lower gate. 3 figures, flashlights, heavy jackets, trying to move equipment toward the fence line. Not residents, not county workers. These people came prepared. I grabbed my coat while Caleb loaded shells into the old pump shotgun near the kitchen table. You think it's Victoria's people? I looked at the camera feed again, then at the storm raging outside. No, I said quietly. I think somebody's getting desperate. By the 6th day of the storm, Black Pine Ridge barely looked like a community anymore. It looked abandoned. Snow had buried most of the lower fences. Half the cabins disappeared behind white drifts taller than pickup trucks, and the only sounds left were wind, generators, and the occasional crack of ice breaking somewhere deep in the trees. That morning, I finally stopped reacting to Victoria Hale and started preparing to destroy her. Because the deeper I dug into those county filings, the clearer one thing became. This road wasn't being targeted over some HOA power struggle. It was worth money, serious money. I left Caleb at the cabin and drove the old plow truck toward the eastern ridge just after sunrise. Roads were barely passable by then, but there was one person I needed to talk to before the storm sealed the mountain completely. Harold Bennett. Most people in Black Pine Ridge knew Harold as the quiet old surveyor living alone near Miller's Creek. But long before luxury cabins and HOA bylaws showed up, Harold helped map half the mountain properties in this county, including mine. His cabin looked buried when I arrived. Smoke drifted from the chimney, while snow covered everything except a narrow path leading to the porch. Harold opened the door before I even knocked. "Took you long enough," he muttered. That caught my attention immediately. "You knew I was coming?" Soon as Victoria started sniffing around Boone Pass again, I figured this day was coming eventually. Inside, his cabin smelled like cedar wood, old books, and black coffee. Maps covered almost every wall. Hand-drawn survey lines, elevation charts, property markers dating back decades. Harold poured coffee into a chipped mug and slid it across the table. Then he looked directly at me. "Your father warned me this might happen after he died." I stayed quiet. "Victoria Hale's people tried buying that road almost 12 years ago," he continued. "Back when developers first started eyeing the western ridge for ski expansion, that stopped me cold." 12 years? Harold nodded slowly. "Your father told them no before they even finished their offer." That sounded exactly like him. Once my father made up his mind about something, mountains moved easier than he did. Harold stood and walked toward an old metal cabinet near the back wall. Then he unlocked it. What he pulled out nearly made my heart stop. Original survey copies, rolled blueprints tied with faded red string, construction photographs, old county correspondence stamped nearly 40 years earlier. Harold carefully spread one survey map across the table between us. "There," he said, pointing near Boone Pass Road. I leaned closer. Clear as day, the original boundary lines showed the entire access road sitting fully inside Boone family property limits. No shared easement, no emergency access clause, nothing. Then Harold handed me another document. County easement rejection notices, multiple ones. Different years, different applications, all denied. Victoria's HOA had apparently spent years trying to legally gain control of Boone Pass Road long before I ever returned to the mountain. "They never stopped trying," Harold said quietly. "They just changed tactics." I stared at the paperwork while the storm rattled the cabin windows outside. All this time, Victoria acted like this dispute suddenly appeared because of emergency access concerns. But this thing had been planned for years, carefully, patiently, and somebody got desperate enough recently to stop waiting. Harold reached beneath another stack of folders and pulled out several photographs. Old construction images. My father standing beside bulldozers. Workers drilling through granite. Snow piled shoulder-high around unfinished road sections. I hadn't seen some of those pictures since I was a kid. One photo hit hardest. Me standing beside my father holding a survey marker almost taller than I was. I must have been 10 years old. Harold noticed me staring. "Your father nearly died building that road," he said quietly. "Avalanches. Rock slides. Frozen equipment. Most folks living up here now have no idea what it cost." I swallowed hard but kept looking through the records. That's when Harold slid one final folder across the table. This one newer, corporate. Typed contracts instead of handwritten records. I opened it slowly and immediately saw resort development logos, investor agreements, property acquisition projections. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" Harold leaned back heavily in his chair. "The real reason they want your road." Inside the folder sat preliminary development plans for something called Black Pine Resort Expansion Initiative. Luxury lodges, private ski access, tourist routes, seasonal commercial traffic estimates. And right through the center of every map, Boone Pass Road. Not beside it, not connected to it, dependent on it. Without my property access, the entire expansion project collapsed. That's why Victoria suddenly stopped acting like a petty HOA president. She wasn't protecting residents anymore. She was protecting investors. By the 6th day of the storm, Black Pine Ridge barely looked like a community anymore. It looked abandoned. Snow had buried most of the lower fences. Half the cabins disappeared behind white drifts taller than pickup trucks, and the only sounds left were wind, generators, and the occasional crack of ice breaking somewhere deep in the trees. That morning, I finally stopped reacting to Victoria Hale and started preparing to destroy her. Because the deeper I dug into those county filings, the clearer one thing became. This road wasn't being targeted over some HOA power struggle. It was worth money, serious money. I left Caleb at the cabin and drove the old plow truck toward the eastern ridge just after sunrise. Roads were barely passable by then, but there was one person I needed to talk to before the storm sealed the mountain completely: Harold Bennett. Most people in Black Pine Ridge knew Harold as the quiet old surveyor living alone near Miller's Creek. But long before luxury cabins and HOA bylaws showed up, Harold helped map half the mountain properties in this county, including mine. His cabin looked buried when I arrived. Smoke drifted from the chimney, while snow covered everything except a narrow path leading to the porch. Harold opened the door before I even knocked. "Took you long enough," he muttered. That caught my attention immediately. You knew I was coming? Soon as Victoria started sniffing around Boone Pass again, I figured this day was coming eventually. Inside, his cabin smelled like cedar wood, old books, and black coffee. Maps covered almost every wall, hand-drawn survey lines, elevation charts, property markers dating back decades. Harold poured coffee into a chipped mug and slid it across the table. Then he looked directly at me. Your father warned me this might happen after he died. I stayed quiet. Victoria Hale's people tried buying that road almost 12 years ago, he continued. Back when developers first started eyeing the Western Ridge for ski expansion, that stopped me cold. 12 years? Harold nodded slowly. Your father told them no before they even finished their offer. That sounded exactly like him. Once my father made up his mind about something, mountains moved easier than he did. Harold stood and walked toward an old metal cabinet near the back wall. Then he unlocked it. What he pulled out nearly made my heart stop. Original survey copies, rolled blueprints tied with faded red string, construction photographs, old county correspondence stamped nearly 40 years earlier. Harold carefully spread one survey map across the table between us. There, he said, pointing near Boone Pass Road. I leaned closer. Clear as day, the original boundary lines showed the entire access road sitting fully inside Boone family property limits. No shared easement, no emergency access clause, nothing. Then Harold handed me another document. County easement rejection notices, multiple ones. Different years, different applications, all denied. Victoria's HOA had apparently spent years trying to legally gain control of Boone Pass Road, long before I ever returned to the mountain. They never stopped trying, Harold said quietly. They just changed tactics. I stared at the paperwork while the storm rattled the cabin windows outside. All this time, Victoria acted like this dispute suddenly appeared because of emergency access concerns. But this thing had been planned for years, carefully, patiently, and somebody got desperate enough recently to stop waiting. Harold reached beneath another stack of folders and pulled out several photographs, old construction images, my father standing beside bulldozers, workers drilling through granite, snow piled shoulder-high around unfinished road sections. I hadn't seen some of those pictures since I was a kid. One photo hit hardest. Me standing beside my father holding a survey marker almost taller than I was. I must have been 10 years old. Harold noticed me staring. Your father nearly died building that road, he said quietly. Avalanches, rock slides, frozen equipment. Most folks living up here now have no idea what it cost. I swallowed hard but kept looking through the records. That's when Harold slid one final folder across the table. This one newer, corporate. Typed contracts instead of handwritten records. I opened it slowly and immediately saw resort development logos, investor agreements, property acquisition projections. My stomach tightened. What is this? Harold leaned back heavily in his chair. The real reason they want your road. Inside the folder sat preliminary development plans for something called Black Pine Resort Expansion Initiative. Luxury lodges, private ski access, tourist routes, seasonal commercial traffic estimates, and right through the center of every map, Boone Pass Road. Not beside it, not connected to it, dependent on it. Without my property access, the entire expansion project collapsed. That's why Victoria suddenly stopped acting like a petty HOA president. She wasn't protecting residents anymore. She was protecting investors. The emergency HOA meeting started 30 minutes late because half the residents couldn't get their vehicles through the snow. That alone should have told people who actually kept this mountain functioning. Outside the lodge, the storm screamed through Black Pine Ridge hard enough to shake the windows while snow buried parked SUVs almost to their wheel wells. Inside, though, the atmosphere felt even uglier. Fear does strange things to people, especially wealthy people trapped on a mountain losing power, supplies, and control at the same time. By the time Caleb and I walked into the lodge, nearly every chair was already filled. Residents stood along the walls holding coffee cups and propane lanterns while generators hummed somewhere beneath the floorboards. And every single conversation stopped when they saw me. Victoria Hale stood near the front beside two HOA attorneys and several board members looking like she'd rehearsed this meeting all day. Large maps of Boone Pass Road hung behind her near a projector screen displaying the words, Community Winter Access Emergency. Dramatic. Predictable. Very Victoria. The second she saw me sit down, her expression tightened slightly. Good. That meant she still didn't know how much evidence I had. Victoria waited until the room quieted before speaking. As everyone knows, she began carefully, Black Pine Ridge is currently facing a dangerous access situation created by one individual refusing to cooperate with emergency winter safety measures. There were murmurs immediately, some angry, some nervous, most tired. She looked directly at me. Silas Boone continues blocking the primary emergency route into this community during the worst snowstorm we've seen in nearly a decade. Then she turned toward the crowd. If medical responders can't access this mountain quickly enough, she paused dramatically, children and elderly residents could be placed at serious risk. There it was again, fear. That was always Victoria's favorite weapon. One resident near the back stood up almost immediately. My wife's oxygen delivery was delayed yesterday because of this mess. Another voice joined in. My grandkids are trapped up here. A third resident pointed directly at me. You don't own the whole mountain, Silas. The room started heating up fast after that. Exactly how Victoria wanted it. I sat quietly through all of it while she continued building momentum. Private ownership does not give someone the right to endanger an entire community, she declared loudly. Especially when county filings clearly establish shared emergency access rights. That's when Caleb leaned toward me. She's laying groundwork, he muttered quietly. I already knew. Victoria wasn't trying to win legally anymore. She was trying to turn the residents emotional enough to force surrender through pressure alone. Then she played her next card. Due to ongoing obstruction, she announced, insurance providers have already contacted the HOA regarding potential liability exposure. That hit the room hard. You could actually feel the panic shift after that. People started whispering immediately. Retirees, vacation homeowners, folks who poured life savings into mountain properties, threaten their insurance, and suddenly logic leaves the building. Victoria saw the reaction and pressed harder. Property values are already being impacted by this dispute. There it was. The real fear, money. Not safety, not emergency access, money. Finally, she looked directly at me again. Silas, nobody wants conflict here. But your refusal to cooperate is hurting this entire community. For several seconds, the room stayed silent, everybody waiting for me to either explode or fold. Instead, I stood up slowly and carried a thick binder toward the front table. Victoria's confidence slipped slightly the second she saw it. Then another binder, and another. The room quieted almost immediately. I set them down directly beside her projector maps, heavy enough to make the table shake. What's all this? One board member asked. I opened the first binder without answering him. Then I pulled out 30 years of road maintenance records, snow removal invoices, bridge repair costs, avalanche cleanup expenses. Every dollar spent maintaining Boone Pass Road since before Black Pine Ridge even existed. All paid by my family, I said calmly. Nobody interrupted me now. I opened the second binder. Inside sat original county easement denial letters, stamped, signed, official. I held one up for the room to see. This county rejected HOA access claims on my road multiple times over nearly 4 decades. The room shifted immediately. You could feel it. Confusion replacing certainty. Victoria stepped forward quickly. These documents are being taken out of context. No, I interrupted calmly. What's being taken out of context is this entire meeting. Then I unrolled Harold Bennett's original survey map across the front table. The room went dead silent, because clear as day, Boone Pass Road sat entirely within Boone family property lines. No community easement. No shared infrastructure designation. Nothing. One resident near the front leaned forward. Wait, then what exactly has the HOA been telling us? Nobody answered the question. Not Victoria. Not the attorneys. Not even the board members sitting behind her, looking suddenly uncomfortable in their expensive winter coats. For the first time since this whole thing started, the room wasn't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. Victoria recovered fast, though. I'll give her that. She stepped toward the survey map and forced another smile onto her face. These are outdated records, she said quickly. The county revised emergency infrastructure classifications years ago. That's interesting, I replied calmly. Then I opened another binder. Inside were the amended filings Nora helped me pull from the county basement archives, including the missing pages, including the altered dates, including the rejected easement requests. I slid them across the table one by one. These revisions were denied repeatedly. The room got quieter with every page. One resident near the fireplace adjusted his glasses while reading the documents. Wait a second, he muttered. These filings don't match the copies the HOA sent us. Exactly. Victoria's jaw tightened. You're confusing people with incomplete information. No, I said. I'm correcting information your HOA spent years hiding. That hit harder than I expected. People started looking around the room at each other now instead of at me. Fear was turning into suspicion. Then the lodge doors opened. Everybody turned. Harold Bennett walked inside covered in snow. The entire room seemed surprised to see him. Most residents barely knew who he was anymore. Just some old surveyor living quietly near Miller's Creek. But the second Harold stepped toward the front holding rolled maps beneath his arm, Victoria's face changed completely. Real panic. Not irritation. Panic. Harold didn't even look at her. He walked straight beside me, laid the original survey tubes onto the table, and spoke loudly enough for the entire room to hear. The Boone family built that road before this HOA ever existed. Dead silence. Harold slowly unrolled another original county map across the table. Old signatures, official stamps, property boundaries untouched by revisions or amendments. Then he looked directly at the residents. "I helped survey Boone Pass Road myself nearly 40 years ago," he said. "And this community tried purchasing access rights multiple times over the years." Murmurs exploded across the lodge. "What? They tried buying it? Why weren't we told that?" Victoria stepped forward immediately. "This is misleading." "No!" Harold snapped sharply. "What's misleading is you telling residents this was ever community property." That shook the room hard, because Harold didn't sound emotional. He sounded certain. People trust certainty, especially older people who've dealt with enough liars in life to recognize the real thing when they hear it. One of the residents stood up slowly near the back. "Hold on," he said. "Are HOA dues being used for legal fights over private land?" Nobody from the board answered him. Another resident spoke up immediately after. "You told us this was emergency access infrastructure." Then another voice. "What investor negotiations?" That one changed everything. Victoria froze for half a second. Tiny moment. But the room noticed it. I reached into my binder slowly and pulled out the resort development maps Harold gave me earlier that day. Then I placed them directly beside the survey records. The reaction was immediate. "What the hell is Black Pine Resort expansion? Luxury ski access? You were negotiating commercial development?" Suddenly everybody was talking at once. Residents crowded toward the table trying to read the documents, while board members started whispering nervously among themselves. Victoria's polished little meeting was collapsing right in front of her. And then the final grenade walked through the door. Rachel Hale, Victoria's daughter, stood near the entrance, breathing hard from the storm outside, snow still covering her coat and boots. The entire room turned toward her. Victoria looked genuinely stunned. "Rachel," she said sharply, "what are you doing here?" Rachel ignored her completely. Instead, she looked directly at the residents. "My mother knew the road wasn't community property." The lodge exploded. Voices everywhere. Shouting. Questions. Confusion. Victoria immediately stepped toward her daughter. "You don't understand what you're talking about." "Yes, I do," Rachel fired back. "You told investors you could secure Boone Pass Road before winter construction planning started." That hit like dynamite. Several residents started yelling at the board immediately. "You lied to us? You used HOA money for this? We were threatened over property values for a resort project?" Victoria finally lost control then. For the first time since I'd known her, the calm, polished mask disappeared completely. "You think you understand what's happening here?" She snapped at Rachel. "Without development, this community collapses financially." "There it is," Caleb muttered beside me. "The truth. Not safety. Not emergency access. Money. Pure money." Then the lodge doors opened again. Deputy Warren Cole stepped inside, carrying snow across the wooden floor while county officers followed behind him. The room quieted almost instantly. Warren removed his gloves slowly before speaking. "Effective immediately," he announced. "County investigators are reviewing multiple property filing irregularities connected to Boone Pass Road." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Outside, the storm slammed against the lodge windows hard enough to make the glass shake. And in that moment, every single person inside finally understood the same terrifying reality. The mountain was officially trapped now. Roads buried, power failing, supplies running low, and the only man capable of keeping Black Pine Ridge connected to the outside world was the same man the HOA had just spent days trying to destroy. The avalanche hit just before sunrise. I heard it before I saw it. A deep, cracking roar rolled across the mountain hard enough to shake my cabin windows, followed by a sound like the entire ridge collapsing into itself. Caleb was already awake by the time I grabbed my coat. "That came from the west route," he said. I already knew. The Western Pass was the HOA's backup access road. Narrow, dangerous, barely maintained, but still their only alternative route off the mountain besides Boone Pass Road. Or at least it had been. By the time we reached the overlook, the storm had turned vicious again. Wind blasted snow sideways across the ridge, while trees groaned beneath heavy ice buildup. Then we saw it. Half the mountain had come down. Snow, rock, shattered pine trees, and mud completely buried the western access road beneath 30 feet of debris. A county plow sat crushed near the bottom of the slide, while emergency lights blinked weakly through blowing snow. Caleb stared at the destruction. "Well," he muttered, "guess your road just became real valuable." He wasn't wrong. Within an hour, panic spread across Black Pine Ridge faster than the storm itself. Generators failing, fuel shortages, food deliveries canceled indefinitely, residents trapped. And now, Boone Pass Road was officially the only remaining route in or out of the mountain. Funny how quickly community property turns back into Silas Boone's road when people need saving. My phone started ringing nonstop before breakfast. Residents, county workers, board members, even people who spent the last week calling me selfish suddenly sounded real polite. But the most important call came around 9 in the morning. Victoria Hale. I stared at her name for 3 full seconds before answering. What? No greeting, no fake politeness, just cold silence on the other end for a moment. Then finally, the county needs immediate access through Boone Pass Road. I looked out my cabin window toward the chained gate buried beneath drifting snow. Sounds like a county problem. Silas, she snapped, already losing patience. This situation has changed. No, I replied calmly. Your leverage disappeared. That shut her up for a second. Outside, wind slammed hard against the cabin while snow piled higher across the ridge. Victoria lowered her voice. Residents are trapped. You mean the same residents you told I was destroying the community? This isn't the time for that. No, I said quietly. This is exactly the time for that. She exhaled sharply like she was forcing herself to stay calm. What do you want? Finally. That was the first honest sentence she'd spoken to me in days. I walked over to the kitchen table where all my evidence binders still sat stacked beside the survey maps. Then I answered carefully. First, the HOA signs legal acknowledgement that Boone Pass Road belongs solely to me. Silence. Second, every easement claim gets withdrawn immediately. Still silence. And third, I continued, future emergency access gets negotiated properly instead of stolen through fake filings and threats. Victoria sounded furious now. You're trying to negotiate while people are trapped? No, I said. I'm refusing to let you rob me during a disaster you helped create. For several seconds, all I heard was her breathing. Then finally, there are county officials organizing an emergency hearing at the lodge this afternoon. Good. You'll open the road afterward? If I get what belongs to me. She hung up without another word. Caleb leaned against the doorway watching me. She sounded desperate. She is. Outside, the storm kept building. By noon, county emergency vehicles started gathering near the lodge, while residents packed inside trying to stay warm. Half the mountain had lost power completely by then. Smoke rose from cabin chimneys all across the ridge while stranded homeowners wandered through snow carrying fuel cans and propane tanks. Fear changes people fast, especially people who spent their whole lives believing money could solve every problem. Because now the only thing standing between Black Pine Ridge and complete isolation was me. The emergency hearing started just after 1 o'clock. County officials filled the front tables while residents crowded shoulder to shoulder inside the lodge wrapped in heavy winter coats. Some looked angry, most looked scared. Victoria stood near the county representatives pretending she still had control of the situation, but I could see it slipping already. Panic had entered the equation now, and panic makes lies harder to manage. One county supervisor stood first. Due to the avalanche closure, he announced, Boone Pass Road is currently the only viable emergency access route remaining for Black Pine Ridge. Murmurs spread instantly across the room. Then he looked toward me. Mr. Boone, county officials are requesting temporary emergency access authorization while this crisis continues. Temporary? Interesting word. I stood slowly. You'll get access, I said calmly, after ownership recognition is signed officially. Victoria immediately snapped back. This is unbelievable. No, I replied. What's unbelievable is trying to steal a man's property before asking him to save your community with it. The room got very quiet after that. Because deep down, everybody knew I was right. Victoria spent the next 20 minutes trying to regain control of the room. But panic had already changed the atmosphere. The avalanche buried the west route. Power was failing. Propane deliveries stopped. And everybody sitting inside that lodge finally understood one thing. Without Boone Pass Road, Black Pine Ridge was finished. Victoria stood beside the county officials, gripping the edge of the table hard enough to whiten her knuckles. This is still an emergency situation, she argued. We cannot allow private demands to interfere with public safety. I almost laughed hearing that. Private demands. Coming from the woman who secretly tried handing my road to investors behind the community's back. One of the county supervisors looked exhausted. Mr. Boone, he asked carefully, are you refusing emergency cooperation? No, I answered calmly. I'm refusing theft disguised as cooperation. Then I opened the first evidence binder. The sound of those metal rings snapping open echoed through the lodge, and suddenly the entire room leaned forward. I started with maintenance records, 38 years of snow removal expenses, bridge repairs, guardrail replacements, landslide clearing invoices, every single dollar paid by my family alone. No HOA contribution, no county maintenance, nothing. I slid the records across the table toward the officials. If Boone Pass Road belonged to the HOA, I said quietly, then somebody should explain why the Boone family spent 4 decades maintaining it without a single cent from the community. Nobody answered because nobody could. Then Nora Diaz stood up near the county records table holding several filing folders against her chest. Victoria's face immediately changed. "Nora," she snapped, "this is inappropriate." Nora ignored her completely. Good for her. She walked directly beside me and opened the county archive records in front of everyone. "These are the original filing logs connected to Boone Pass Road," she explained calmly. Then she pointed toward the timestamps. At least 3 amendment submissions contain altered filing sequences inconsistent with county processing procedures. One county official frowned immediately. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Nora said carefully, "somebody modified filing timelines after the original submissions were denied." The room exploded into whispers. Victoria stepped forward instantly. "That's speculation." "No," Nora replied. "It's metadata." That line hit hard, because facts sound different than accusations. People can argue emotions. They struggle arguing evidence. Then Harold Bennett slowly stood from the back row holding the original survey tubes beneath his arm. Even before he spoke, the room quieted again. Old men with certainty command attention in places like this. Harold carefully unrolled the original Boone survey map across the front table, while snow hammered the lodge windows outside. "I surveyed Boone Pass Road personally," he said firmly. "The entire access route sits inside Boone family property boundaries." He pointed directly at the original markers. These coordinates never changed. Then he looked straight at the county officials. But the amended HOA filings did. That shifted the room completely. Not emotionally, physically. People actually started moving away from Victoria's side of the lodge, like trust itself was changing direction. Then came the real damage. Rachel Hale stood up. Victoria turned immediately. "Rachel," she warned sharply. But her daughter kept talking anyway. "The board knew the easement claims were weak," Rachel admitted. "That's why investor meetings were kept private." Residents erupted again. "What investors? You told us there weren't developers involved." Rachel looked directly at the crowd. "My mother promised resort partners she could secure permanent access through Boone Pass Road before winter planning approvals." There it was, out loud, public, no taking it back now. Several residents immediately turned toward the board members sitting near the wall. "You used HOA dues for this? You lied to everybody. We thought this was about emergency access." Victoria finally lost her composure completely. "You have no idea how much money this community was going to lose without expansion," she shouted. Wrong thing to say. The second those words left her mouth, the room turned on her instantly, because now everybody understood the truth. This entire crisis started over profit. Not safety, not emergency responders. Profit. One older resident stood up furious. "My wife spent $30,000 on special assessments last year. You told us it was for infrastructure improvements." Another yelled, "You tried stealing private property for developers?" And then came the moment Victoria Hale truly lost. Deputy Warren Cole stepped forward, holding another county folder. "Based on current evidence," he announced, "county investigators are now reviewing possible fraud related to property filings, misuse of HOA funds, and unlawful development negotiations." Dead silence. Even Victoria stopped talking. Warren continued calmly. "Pending investigation, all HOA claims over Boone Pass Road are temporarily suspended." That hit like a gunshot inside the lodge. Suspended. Meaning, the road legally snapped back into my control immediately. Victoria looked stunned. Actually stunned. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, she finally understood something. She wasn't controlling the situation anymore. The storm outside intensified again right then, rattling the lodge windows hard enough to make several residents jump. And almost like the mountain itself wanted perfect timing. The lights flickered twice, then half the building went dark. The generator kicked on 5 seconds later, but those 5 seconds changed the entire room. Because in complete darkness, with the storm screaming outside and half the mountain already trapped under snow, people stopped thinking like HOA residents. They started thinking like survivors. When the emergency lights finally flickered back on, nobody was looking at Victoria Hale anymore. They were looking at me. The irony would have been funny if the situation wasn't so serious. A week earlier, these same people were calling me paranoid, selfish, dangerous. Now they wanted the man they tried to destroy to save them. Deputy Warren stepped toward me quietly, while the room kept arguing behind us. "You need to make a decision soon," he said under his breath. "Temperatures are dropping faster than expected." I already knew. Outside, conditions were getting deadly. Another 12 hours without supply access, and some of those upper ridge cabins were going to start freezing solid. I looked around the lodge one more time. Residents panicking, board members avoiding eye contact. Victoria standing alone beside the table with her entire little empire collapsing around her. Then I looked back at Warren. "I'll clear the road." The room went silent almost immediately. Not because they were surprised, because most of them suddenly realized they wouldn't have done the same thing in my position. Victoria stepped forward carefully. "You're reopening access?" I looked directly at her. I'm saving the people you used. That one landed hard. Even she felt it. Caleb and I left the lodge within minutes. Outside, the storm hit like a wall the second we stepped into it. Snow blasted sideways across the parking area while abandoned vehicles sat half buried beneath drifting ice. The mountain barely looked real anymore. It looked swallowed. By the time we reached the gate, snow had drifted nearly halfway up the steel bars. The old HOA warning notices nailed to nearby trees snapped violently in the wind while my chained entrance sat buried beneath white powder. I stood there for a second staring at it all. Funny thing is, I could have walked away. Legally, morally, emotionally, nobody would have blamed me after what Victoria did. But my father didn't build Boone Pass Road, so people would die proving a point. He built it so they could survive winters exactly like this one. So I unlocked the chain. Then Caleb and I fired up both snowplows. For the next 7 straight hours, we fought the mountain. Not the HOA, not Victoria. The mountain. Visibility dropped so low at times I could barely see the front blade pushing snow ahead of me. Wind slammed against the trucks hard enough to shake the frames, while ice buried the road again, almost as fast as we cleared it. Twice, we nearly lost the eastern edge near Miller's Drop after heavy drifts collapsed beneath the tires. One wrong move up there and the whole truck disappears into the ravine. But we kept pushing, cabin by cabin, turn by turn, bridge by bridge. And slowly, Boone Pass Road came back to life beneath the storm. Around midnight, the first emergency convoy finally made it through. Fuel trucks, medical responders, county equipment. Residents actually stepped outside their cabins, watching the convoy pass, like they were witnessing rescue helicopters during a war. Some waved at me. Some looked ashamed. Most just looked relieved. By dawn, Black Pine Ridge survived. Barely. The next morning, county officials officially released their emergency findings. Boone Pass Road belonged solely to Silas Boone. All HOA claims were declared invalid pending fraud investigations. Criminal inquiries into altered filings and financial misconduct were now underway. Victoria Hale resigned before noon. Nobody even tried stopping her. A few days later, after the storm finally broke, I walked back down to the gate alone. The mountain was quiet again. Fresh snow covered everything except the road itself. Clean, open, alive. The old HOA warning sign still hung near the entrance, but now snow slowly buried them 1 inch at a time beneath the drifts, like the mountain itself was erasing them. I stood there for a long moment before finally removing the last chain from the gate. Not because anybody forced me to, not because the HOA won, because the road was mine, always had been. And now everybody on Black Pine Ridge finally understood that too. 3 weeks after the storm, Black Pine Ridge finally started looking like a mountain again instead of a disaster zone. Snow still covered most of the upper ridge, but the roads were open, the power stayed on, and for the first time in nearly a month, people stopped talking about emergency access every 5 minutes. Now they talked about lawsuits. Turns out wealthy retirees get very interested in HOA finances once they realize their money-funded secret resort negotiations behind their backs. Victoria Hale resigned 2 days after the county findings became public. Didn't even face the residents herself. Just emailed a formal statement blaming miscommunication during an emergency situation before disappearing off the mountain completely. Coward's exit. Last I heard, county investigators were still digging through HOA financial records, along with development contracts tied to the resort project. Several board members hired attorneys almost immediately after Rachel released internal emails proving they knew about the investor meetings months earlier. Funny how quickly loyalty disappears once criminal investigations show up. The resort deal collapsed within a week. Investors pulled out quietly after realizing Boone Pass Road wasn't legally obtainable anymore. Without my property access, the entire expansion project became worthless overnight. Millions of dollars gone because one stubborn mountain road refused to move. Honestly, that part still makes me smile. One cold morning, Caleb and I finally started repairing the old gate near the lower ridge entrance. The storm twisted one of the hinges badly after snowdrifts piled against it for days. Caleb held the steel brace steady while I tightened fresh bolts into the support post. "You ever think about selling now?" he asked. I looked up from the wrench. "Selling what?" "The road, the land, all of it." I laughed quietly to myself. City people always assume every problem eventually turns into a money conversation. But this mountain was never about money to me. I looked out toward Boone Pass Road, stretching through the ridge below us. Fresh plow lines cut clean through the snow, while sunlight reflected off the frozen trees. "My father spent half his life building this place," I said quietly. "I'm not going to be the Boone who loses it." Caleb nodded slowly. Dad would have enjoyed watching Victoria implode, though. That got a laugh out of me, because he was right. My father hated dishonest people more than almost anything. Not loud people, not rude people, dishonest people. The kind who smile while reaching into your pocket. We worked quietly for a while after that, replacing damaged chain brackets and re-welding one side of the steel frame where county plows clipped the entrance during the storm. That gate looked older now, rougher, but somehow stronger too. Kind of like the rest of us. Around noon, a dark SUV slowly pulled up near the entrance. I recognized Martin Keller immediately. Same retired dentist who screamed at me during the storm about emergency access and HOA rights. He stepped out awkwardly holding a cardboard box beneath one arm. Didn't say much at first either. Just stood there beside the road, shifting uncomfortably, like a man trying to rehearse pride away before speaking. Finally, he cleared his throat. My wife made cinnamon bread. I looked at the box, then at him. That's supposed to be an apology? He actually looked embarrassed. Honestly, yeah. Caleb nearly smiled behind me. Martin stared down Boone Pass Road for a long moment before speaking again. I believed Victoria, he admitted quietly. Most of us did. I stayed silent. Because older men don't always need speeches after admitting they were wrong. Sometimes silence respects them more. Martin shoved his hands into his coat pockets. You still came and dug my SUV out during the storm, he said. After everything. That's what the road's for. He nodded slowly. Then he looked directly at me. For what it's worth, Silas, most folks up here know who really kept this mountain alive. That one stayed with me after he left. Because respect means more when it's earned back instead of given freely. The strange thing about Black Pine Ridge after the storm wasn't how much changed. It was how quiet everything became afterward. No HOA patrol vehicles creeping past my gate. No legal notices taped to my mailbox. No contractors pretending they belonged on my land. Just mountain silence again. Real silence. The kind you only notice after weeks of constant fighting. As March rolled in, the snow finally started melting across the lower ridge. Water rushed beneath the repaired bridge near Cedar Turn while patches of dark asphalt slowly reappeared along Boone Pass Road. And for the first time in years, people stopped treating my road like a problem. They started treating it like what it actually was. A lifeline. One Saturday morning, I walked outside and found 3 residents already clearing branches near the lower drainage ditch without being asked. Retired guys mostly. Cold weather jackets, work gloves. Thermoses sitting on truck hoods. One of them looked up when he saw me. Figured this road's carried us long enough, he said. About time we carried some of the load back. That would have sounded fake a month earlier. Now it sounded honest. We spent most of the day repairing runoff channels damaged during the avalanche storm. Nobody argued. Nobody brought up HOA rules or easements or legal nonsense. Just people working, the way mountain communities are supposed to work. By afternoon, kids from the upper ridge started sledding near the lower hill beside my property. Their parents sat nearby drinking coffee while the children flew down snowbanks laughing loud enough to echo through the trees. A few months ago, some of those same parents avoided eye contact with me at community meetings. Now they waved. Funny how survival changes people. Even the road itself looked different to me. Not because the mountain changed, because the fight was finally over. The repaired bridges stood solid again. Fresh gravel covered the damaged shoulders near Miller's Drop, and new support posts lined the sharper curves where avalanches hit hardest during the storm. Boone Pass Road survived. So did I. A week later, Deputy Warren stopped by the cabin carrying an envelope from the county office. Official paperwork, he said. Thought you'd want the original copy. Inside sat the finalized county determination. Full property ownership confirmed. Boone Pass Road. No easement claims. No community access designation. No HOA authority. Just truth finally written where everybody could see it. Warren leaned against the porch railing, looking out toward the ridge. You know, he said quietly, most people would have left this mountain after what happened. Probably. But you stayed. I thought about that for a second, then looked out toward the road disappearing into the trees below. My father used to say mountains remember the people who quit on them. Warren nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what that meant. Because people like us usually do. Later that evening, after Caleb headed home, I walked out toward my father's old workshop behind the cabin. I hadn't gone inside much since he died. Too many memories in there. The smell of motor oil still lingered beneath the cold wood and rusted tools. Old chains hung from the walls beside faded survey maps, while stacks of worn equipment manuals sat untouched beneath layers of dust. I moved slowly through the shop, running my hand across the old workbench where my father rebuilt engines during winter storms. Then I noticed something taped beneath the corner lamp. Folded paper. Yellowed with age. I pulled it loose carefully and opened it. Just one sentence written in my father's handwriting. You don't truly own land unless you're willing to defend it. I stood there for a long time staring at those words while evening light faded through the workshop windows. Because suddenly the entire fight made sense to me. Victoria thought ownership came from paperwork. Investors thought ownership came from money. The HOA thought ownership came from pressure. But my father understood something they never did. Land doesn't belong to the loudest people. It belongs to the ones willing to protect it when protecting it costs something. Outside, the mountain finally stood quiet again. No sirens, no meetings, no threats, just wine moving softly through the pine trees above Boone Pass Road. Home. A few mornings after the storm ended, I woke up before sunrise and drove the old plow truck halfway up Boone Pass Road. No emergency calls, no HOA meetings, no lawyers standing at my gate pretending they owned something they didn't build. Just silence, the kind of mountain silence you only hear after surviving something ugly. I parked near the overlook where my father used to stop every winter to check snowfall along the ridge. Snow still covered most of Black Pine Ridge, but the storm had finally passed. The sky above the mountains slowly turned orange, while sunlight pushed through the pine trees one branch at a time. For the first time in weeks, the road was quiet, safe, open, mine. And sitting there alone watching the sunrise hit that mountain, I realized something. This whole fight was never really about a road. It was about what happens when powerful people believe money gives them ownership over everything they touch. Victoria Hale thought fear would make me surrender. That's how people like her operate. They pressure you publicly, isolate you privately, and hope you eventually decide fighting back costs too much. Truth is, most decent people fold long before the fight ever reaches a courtroom. Not because they're weak, but because constant pressure wears people down. Legal threats, public humiliation, neighbors turning against you. Lies repeated often enough that even good people start questioning themselves. I understood that better than anyone after this storm. There were nights I sat alone in that cabin wondering if standing my ground was worth it anymore. But every time I looked at Boone Pass Road, I saw my father out there in freezing weather building something meant to outlast men like Victoria Hale. That road carried families through avalanches, blizzards, floods, decades of brutal winters. And the people trying to steal it never once lifted a shovel to protect it. That's the part I'll never forget. Ownership means responsibility, not paperwork, not money. Responsibility. The mountain taught me that years ago. You protect what protects others, even when it costs you sleep, even when people turn against you, even when standing alone would have been easier. As the sun climbed higher over Black Pine Ridge, I looked down at the road cutting through the snow below me. Kids would be sledding near those hills again soon. Residents would drive those curves safely all winter long, without ever thinking about how close this community came to losing everything over greed. And honestly, that's enough for me. Because in the end, the mountain stayed honest even when people didn't. The road stayed standing, and so did I. But I want to know what you would have done in my position. If an HOA tried taking property your family built generations ago, would you have fought back? Would you have opened the road after everything they did? And do you think Victoria Hale deserved worse after what she put that community through? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoy these mountain property battles, HOA revenge stories, and small-town conflicts where ordinary people stand up against corruption, make sure you subscribe and stick around for the next story. Because around here, the mountains always remember who stood their ground.